happy to welcome today's guest, Kimberly Leonard. She's a policy and politics correspondent for The Insider who reports and lives in South Florida. She was the first to report about the DeSantis Disney wedding, the formation of a pro-DeSantis Super PAC, and got the inside-the-room accounts of a secret conservative gathering at Trump National Doral in Miami. She co-authored a long-form profile about Florida First Lady Casey DeSantis. Kimberly Leonard, welcome to the news.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It is great to talk with you. And, Ron DeSantis is so much in the news and people are pontificating about him and trying to understand DeSantis' world. And it's great to have someone who is an expert on Ron DeSantis, and maybe we can get to the bottom. Let me start by asking you about the media. How has the national media coverage of DeSantis been so far? Has it been fair? Has it been accurate?
Well, DeSantis has never had a very positive view of the media. And actually, if you read his 2011 book, he has a whole section in there about how he sees the media as biased. And so, that was sort of ingrained in him for a while. But one of the things that hardened his view against the media, I think, is probably the back and forth over COVID, because it was always just portrayed as, DeSantis being reckless because he decided not to follow federal health guidance. He reopened schools pretty early. He reopened businesses. He blocked companies from instituting vaccine mandates. And so the backlash around that was pretty heated. And he wrote about that in his latest book, The Courage to Be Free. And his relationship with a lot of the press isn't great. It's great with a lot of the conservative press. He is very available to them. But he hasn't always gotten the best coverage. And of late as well, I would say that a lot of coverage has focused on, some of the sinking poll numbers when it comes to Trump, and analyzing his different moves when he's on the campaign trail. A lot of the reporting says that he's not coming across as particularly warm and approachable and things like that. So, he still has a lot of time to define himself. He hasn't officially launched, but I'm really curious to see how their relationship, and by there I mean the campaign's relationship, with a lot of other outlets, that are not Fox News, that are not Florida Voice, which is a conservative publication down here, how that really shapes up once he officially launches, which I think that he will.
Me too. Do you feel that the national coverage has been fair to him? Like, for example, I'm thinking of the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill, and the reason I'm calling it that is it's a great name. Like, I can remember it. I don't actually remember the official name of the bill that is more actually appropriate. Is that just the nature of the beast? You got to get used to it, or do you think there was anything sort of nefarious in the way that was covered?
Well, first of all, it is controversial, and it is something that families, I think, are still getting used to, how to, as families are changing, you have transgender parents, transgender teachers, transgender students, how do you make them feel welcome, I think, is one question. And then other parents kind of saying, well, wait a minute, I'm not really comfortable with that. So the reason it's controversial, I think everyone is just trying to be a good parent, and people have a different definition of what that looks like, right? They see that differently, that there's not going to be an agreement about that. So the way that the bill was covered was definitely, they called it the "Don't Say Gay" bill. It's technically called the Parental Rights and Education Act. And basically it says from kindergarten to third grade, you cannot instruct students about gender identity and sexual orientation. And so for a while, the DeSantis administration they were playing defense on it. It was being called the "Don't Say Gay" bill. And they were saying, well, you can't not say gay in the classroom. That's not what the bill does. And so what it has done is that it has led to a lot of confusion in classrooms, and in school board meetings. I mean, I covered a Miami-Dade school board meeting in which they ended up striking down a move to celebrate LGBTQ History Month, even though I reached out to the governor's office and they told me, no, that wouldn't be in violation of the Parental Rights and Education Act. So basically, the school district was being extra cautious about that. Now, a lot of parents would probably look at this law, and it depends where you are with your kids and what you're comfortable talking about. But a lot of parents might look at that and say, okay, that's fine. What's sort of changing now is that the legislature wants to expand it to up to 8th grade so that it would coincide with sex education. But then the education department is also going to further restrict discussions all the way up to 12th grade, where they basically say, well, it can't be taught in all these other subjects. It has to be kept as part of health class, as part of sex ed. And so that's just making a lot of people nervous. And some people are leaving Florida because, they don't feel welcome. They don't feel welcome either in their families or in their classrooms. And so, it is a contentious issue. I don't think that brushing over it and making it sound simple is the right way to cover it. And I certainly haven't tried to cover it that way.
Now, we recently have been hearing about Ron DeSantis's blue collar roots. We've been hearing things, I guess his sister passed away. It's part of his story that he's talking about. Even though this is part of my book, Filthy Rich Politicians, there's a chapter on Ivy League populists. And I think Ron DeSantis qualifies as someone who certainly went to Ivy League schools, but doesn't want to be identified that way. But he does have a claim of coming from a blue collar background, and that seems to have really been informative in who he became. I guess what do you make of that background, and how important do you think it is that it's like now coming out, I guess, as he prepares to launch this presidential race?
Yeah, well, it's been really interesting to see him define himself before officially launching, and he'll have a lot of opportunity to do that. But one of the things that he did in his book was he really worked to distance himself between his education and who he is. I mean, he went to Yale undergrad. And he didn't go because he was part of a rich family, not at all. He was someone who was very, very smart and worked really hard. And so he got in. And then after that, he went to Harvard Law School. So he has the pedigree of the elite. I mean, that's how he's going to be seen. So in his book, he really was sort of playing that down, saying, well, if I could survive that world, which I didn't really like, then I could definitely, survive time in Washington. And that was something that he sort of brought with him on the campaign trail and so forth. I've spent time in the town where he grew up in Dunedin, Florida, and I did walk around, and it's very working class, very, small town feel. And I did walk around and I thought, I wonder what it would be like for someone with this background to go to a school like Yale and Harvard, just because, you are in a classroom surrounded by people whose parents run the country. I mean, that's what these classrooms are. And so but at the same time, DeSantis obviously wanted to go. He obviously worked to go, and he stayed on the Ivy League track. And so part of being in a Republican primary, I think, is distancing yourself from that, just because there seems to be this movement toward, more populism, more working class for the Republican Party. And so being a part of the establishment is seen as a liability for a lot of candidates, and especially for DeSantis, I think, who's been in politics for the last 10 years or so. So Trump is going to frame him as a lifelong politician, as part of the elite, as part of the establishment. And so any way that he can distance himself from that, I think he'll go toward.
They're all Ivy League, and I think Marco Rubio was like the closest we got to someone who could become president who wasn't an Ivy Leaguer, and he's cast as an elite establishment type, probably compared to DeSantis. It's interesting how that turns out.
Yeah. I mean, most of the people who run our country went to these schools. There's a reason people try to go there. They result in a lot of success later in life.
So, am I right? Is DeSantis his parents are from Ohio? Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, they grew up there, in that area, but then he spent his whole life in Florida. So he was born over in Jacksonville. They spent a little time in Orlando, but Dunedin, Florida, is where he grew up, and it's real. I mean, it's a really, really cute town. I had a good time when I visited. I got my fish sandwich. It's just real small town, like Gulf Coast, Florida, and so. He is a lifelong Floridian. I think that works for him in terms of, touting a lot of these policies in Florida and so forth. But I do think he's trying to also, Florida in so many ways. Someone said to me recently, like, oh, it's like being a foreign correspondent, just because it's so different from the rest of the US. And I completely agree with that as someone who worked in Washington before this. And so I think that trying to be able to, be from these parts of the US. I mean, Trump lost those states, right? Too. So that's probably a part of it. And just being able to identify and say, I'm really this person at heart, and these are where my values come from. It's definitely a profile that he'll be looking to sell.
Do you have any read on what it seems like Ron DeSantis has an accent? And to me, it sort of sounds like a Maryland accent. I'm from Maryland, and like it sounds like he's from the eastern shore of Maryland or something. It's not exactly the same, but is that a a regional accent? Do you have any idea what that is, or is it just unique to Ron DeSantis?
Oh gosh, I mean, he does have a certain inflection of way of speaking that I kind of have like this cadence that I've noticed and everything. But um, I don't know what is the accent. I mean, I'm in Miami, so there's a lot of Latino accents here. I'm not sure, and it could have been influenced by his time up in the Northeast. But yeah, I don't really know regionally where it's identified as being. I'm bilingual, so sometimes I speak in ways that people think is off, but I don't really know.
In the intro, I noted that you broke this story about Ron DeSantis having gotten married at Disney, which was obviously a huge story because he had been in a fight with Disney, battling Disney, and here he like loves it so much that he got married there. I guess if you would talk about how you were able to break that story and find out about that, and then what the fallout was.
Yeah, well, first off, I was working on a profile about Florida First Lady Casey DeSantis. And as part of that, you really dig up everything that you can. You look for documents, you look for social media stuff, you call up people they know. I mean, I was just, basically not sleeping and trying to get this done before the election because I thought it was really important to talk about who she is and the influence that she has in her husband's career, which is a tremendous amount of influence. And so I won't say who I spoke with, but I was speaking to someone who happened to live in the Jacksonville area where Casey had been a TV anchor. And I mentioned to this person who wasn't in media or anything like that, just, that I was writing this profile. And this person said to me, oh, I just loved seeing her on television. I said, oh that I guess you would remember that and everything. And she said, well, I loved her wedding segment. And I said, wedding segment? Where was there a wedding segment? So I got all excited trying to track down this wedding segment, which, as it turns out, Casey modeled a bunch of different wedding dresses on television, and then she had viewers pick. But then, super on brand for Casey, she actually went and picked her a different dress. So that was kind of funny. But what happened was, I don't want to give away too much because I don't want to, there are other things I'm looking for that I'm hoping to get. But basically, as I was going through and as I was able to get in contact with people who had been at the wedding, I asked, where did they get married? And the person said Disney World. And there's this long pause and I said, where did they get married? Disney World. I said, you didn't think that was ironic that here he was studying Disney? So anyway, we ended up putting that out. But I have to say, the DeSantis campaign, so it's actually in DeSantis's book that he got married there. And
In
he's
his
been
first
talking
book or in the new book?
no, not in his first. This was not something that was known anywhere. I mean, it was like, I wrote this story and I couldn't, and I had trouble believing it because there were dozens of profiles that major outlets by people who are better journalists than I do had written, and no one had gotten this tidbit. But I got the marriage license. I got more people from the wedding. Like, I got enough to know that this had gone down and everything. But DeSantis had actually put this in his book, and he would have finished writing in his book that just came out. And he would have finished writing about it before my story came out. So it was and then now, if you watch his appearances all over the US, he talks about it. He goes, I actually got married at Disney World. It's become like a big talking point. And then he makes fun of how he said to his wife, whatever you want, I just don't want pictures with Mickey and Donald Duck, which is too bad because I looked for those pictures high and wide, and now I guess I know why, because DeSantis said he didn't want it. But yeah, it was something that he already had published, so I guess I spoiled the surprise. But our Casey DeSantis profile had a lot of items that ended up then appearing in the book because the campaign didn't work with us to confirm information. They didn't provide anything. They kind of just let us know afterwards that there were no major corrections or anything like that. But many of the items that appeared in our profile ended up being in the book. So that was just reassuring to know, okay, I worked really hard to get this right, and it was accurate.
The impression of Casey DeSantis is that she's something of a Svengali, that she is like the Karl Rove, meets Nancy Reagan of Ron DeSantis, that she is essentially the chief strategist. She calls the shots. If you don't get along with Casey, you're done. And by the way, Ron DeSantis goes through staffers, at least historically he has, at a pretty good clip. Is that is that a caricature, or is that pretty much right on, that
There is
impression?
there is no way to overplay her influence in his orbit. Okay, Casey is the way that she was described by so many people while we were talking to them about her was that she was like Hillary Clinton, except better at managing image. And what they meant by being like Hillary Clinton was, first of all, she has a lot of autonomy, but second of all, you vote for Ron, you're getting Casey. It's a two-person deal. You have the two for
Yes.
one deal that Clinton used to talk about. And what's interesting about her is, first of all, she just knows how to, create this image around her husband that he's, this father and this husband, and dotes on her and everything else, but also is really good about talking about his policy initiatives, and some of the things that might be more controversial. For example, the Don't Say Gay parental rights bill. She will talk about it as, well, of course parents want to be involved in their children's education. Of course they want to know what's going on. Of course they want to have a say. And so when put that way, it doesn't sound controversial. So she's very good about doing that. But she also is just a huge asset to him. He listens to her. I mean, so many people basically told me when they were on his campaign, if they all had one piece of advice and Casey said something else, that's it. It's decided, And so they work as a team. They are a pair. She has a lot of influence. She has a lot of autonomy. She is just going to be someone who's going to be really interesting to get to know. And I just can't help but keep thinking about what it's going to be like when he does officially run, and what it's going to mean to potentially, because one of the things they did in Florida was to really bring in suburban women, especially suburban moms. And I think if he does run, that they'll replicate that strategy and try to bring them in. And obviously that's a demographic that Trump is struggling with, and did struggle with before. So Casey might, our story concluded basically, there's all this, did Trump make Ron DeSantis? Casey made Ron DeSantis, and he would not be governor if it weren't for her. And he knows that. And everyone we talked with said that, they're just this dynamic duo of ambition and power, and they just really see eye to eye on everything. So I don't know. I think potentially, I just think it'll be interesting to see how compelling voters find that.
Yeah, because I do think that there's an opportunity. Trump is obviously weak or vulnerable when it comes to suburbanites, especially so-called soccer moms. But on the other hand, I think that Hillary Clinton was hated. Nancy Reagan wasn't even that popular. People loved Ron. People loved Bill. I don't know that they like. Maybe there's some sexism at play here. I'm not saying there's not, but I'm not sure that they like the spouse who is the tough one who's calling the shots. And it'll be interesting to see if that stereotype holds true in the 21st century. How she would respond to being cast as the Svengali like that.
I just think that Casey has been able to learn from so many women before her, and she's also technically a millennial, I think, like I am. And so, because he's Gen X, she's a couple years younger,
Hey, same
geriatric
thing with my
millennial.
wife and me. I'm
Yeah.
Gen X. She's a millennial. So
Right, right. So I think that our generation, not to overanalyze, but I'm going to do it. We're used to telling our own story, right? We've seen that with people who are millennials. They don't just allow themselves to be defined by anyone, really. And you see that with how they deal with the media, right? They decide what the story is, and they go to friendly outlets because they want to give their perspective. And the image they put forth, that's the image that they want to see come back at them. And so Casey is just way more in tune with perception than a lot of the women who came before her. So, I mean, yes, she has that powerful Hillary Clinton thing going on, but she also is dressing like a supportive mom and first lady. I mean, if you look at her Instagram account, she's with her kids on a golf cart. She's putting forth an image that she believes people want to see. And
Yeah, like
so,
Hillary was like, I'm not going to be Tammy Wynette baking cookies. She refused to play that role, and then ultimately, I think she had to. But she tried not to play that role. She went by Hillary Rodham initially, back in Arkansas. And it seems like Casey, from a aesthetic standpoint, is more like Melania Trump than
yeah,
Nancy.
Jackie O is
Yeah,
the comparison that I always hear, the conservative Jackie O, and don't forget too, let's say he gets the nomination, he's up against the oldest president in history. So that contrast of a young family, it doesn't just say, oh, we're young. It says we're doing this because we care about our children and our future. So there's always that subliminal messaging that's going on that Casey is just always in tune with.
totally. But I have to say, I've been burned by this one because I I was sadly I was a Rubio fan. I feel so stupid. But I was really hoping that Rubio was going to be like this first Hispanic uh, president, first Gen X president. And I remember talking about the ads. You don't even have to you don't have to mention the name Bill Clinton when you run against Hillary. All you have to do is show the picture of Marco Rubio and his wife and kids, like holding hands, walking on the beach. And that says generational change. So I'm a little bitter that we never got that, but maybe Ron and Casey will take us to the promised land of a Republican Camelot, a Kennedy-esque thing that because it's been Republicans tend to like old people, I think, whereas it's Democrats who have sort of gone in for the generational change.
Well, they say that, but Nancy Pelosi just gave up her seat. Schumer's in his
Yeah,
70s, and Biden is going to be 82 if reelected. So, that we did a project called Red, White, and Gray at Insider, and it really looks at how our country is run by people who are in advanced age, and there's a bunch of reasons for that, but the main reason is power. The longer you're in there, the more power you have, and people are willing to, basically put up with a lot for the institution that exists and to support that institution.
So I wanted to ask you about a video that made a little splash. It wasn't much. It didn't cause too many reverberations, but there was a video of Ron DeSantis where he was saying his name DeSantis, and they were juxtaposing it. So like sometimes he would say, "I'm Governor Ron DeSantis," and other times he would say, "I'm Governor Ron DeSantis." So this is a recent thing, and back to Hillary, but it reminded me a little bit of the video of Hillary with the Southern accent, where she's trying to be something she's not. It made me worry that DeSantis is going to be like cast as a phony. He doesn't even know how to pronounce his own last name. What's the deal with that?
Well, Trump is definitely going to cast him as a phony. So let's just put that aside. No matter what happens, that will be a thing. Um, so this actually goes back a decade, and I have been waiting for Trump to bring it up, and he did. Then was it last week or 2 weeks ago? He ended up resharing a post on Truth Social in which Governor DeSantis says his name DeSantis, 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 and then DeSantis. And this was a thing when he was running for governor back in 2018. So it's just like now the national media is catching on, but it was something I came across just because I've spent too much time, digging up old clips about Casey and Ron. But basically, growing up, Ron DeSantis, he always went by DeSantis, and his friends just called him D, like DEE, the letter D. And in fact, Casey, when they first started dating, was always calling him D too. And I had some folks who were friends with her who said that for a while they didn't even know what Ron's real name was because Casey was always calling him D. So he went by D forever. And what ended up happening was that in an ad then, or then when he ran for Congress in 2012, there were some ads in which it was said DeSantis, and that kind of shifted back and forth. And I think when people read his name, they automatically go to DeSantis. And so, I mean, it's one of those things, right? It's just kind of silly. But now he oscillates back and forth between DeSantis and DeSantis. And, every once in a while you'll see a D come in. But it's just one of those things that, Trump is always making fun of weird stuff like that. Even if it's not, it's not about his policy. It's not anything like that. But it's sort of like, why don't you know how to pronounce your name? And so Trump has obviously seen this and he'll latch onto it. I mean, you've seen him. He's made fun of Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Like he has made Buttigieg. He's like made fun at rallies and stuff like that. So I expected him to bring it up at a rally first, but he ended up bringing it up on Truth Social and making fun of that. So
this one, though, I have to tell you, this one struck me as potentially more damaging than just a fun, flippant mockery, because it suggests that that DeSantis is willing to change his very name, the pronunciation of his name, for voters. Like, because it seems very transactional and strategic and like phony. And then the funny thing is, I was down in Miami with my wife Erin DeLulo. We were walking, on South Beach, like on that boardwalk or what. It's not really a board, but whatever. What do you guys call that down there?
just like you mean the brick pathway
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
Yeah, it's just the pathway, I guess. I don't
The promenade,
know.
whatever. We were
Yeah.
walking, and I was like, "What a phony, Ron DeSantis." And then she's like, somehow we got on it, and she's like, "Well, she pronounces her name DeLulo," and I'm like, "No, it's DeLulo. You've never said DeLulo," and turns out maybe we've been pronouncing her name differently. She and I have. So I don't even now. I can't be too judgmental on Ron DeSantis.
Well, apparently Casey does prefer DeSantis, and she always says that in ads and everything, and that's how she introduces herself. I mean, they need to get it down just because it's going to be a thing, right? And people mispronounce my name Leonard all the time, but that doesn't mean that I switched to Leonard. I just no, it's Leonard. So it's okay to correct people, but yeah, I think that probably DeSantis is where most people are, and I could see DeSantis thinking, oh well, it's not that important, don't correct people, it's like this doesn't matter, and just thinking of it as a small thing, but it is the kind of thing. I understand where you're coming from, but I think mainly the biggest piece here is that it's the kind of thing that Trump is going to latch onto, right? And then he's going to, they're going to be at a debate and he's going to say like, okay, DeSantis, like you can almost like picture how it's going to go down. So, yeah, that's where we are.
Well, speaking of attacks, Trump recently attacked the state of Florida. Yeah. And I wanted to get your take on, like, does Trump have a point? Is it possible that Ron DeSantis actually wasn't that great of a governor compared to Charlie Crist and Jeb Bush and Rick Scott or whoever? Is Florida not that great? Maybe it's just great because the weather's awesome and you guys have like a beach. And if so, like, will it work? Like, doesn't the fact that Donald Trump chose to live in Florida undermine the criticism of the state? What do you think?
That's true. Well, I don't want to talk about what's good policy and bad policy. I'll let the voters decide that. But I think that the case that DeSantis would make is that, he almost didn't become governor in 2018. He almost lost to Andrew Gillum, who was progressive. And one can imagine that the COVID policies would have been very different. And I don't think that there's any pretending that a lot of the people who moved to Florida, yes, they moved because the weather is great. It's so fun to be out on the water. It's so, it's very laid back. It's just it's a much more enjoyable life. Everything else aside, it is just exciting and fun and happy. Okay. And that's something that is going to exist no matter who's governor. Having said that, I cannot even tell you how many people come up to me regularly and just talk about, well, we moved here because schools were open, or we moved here because I could actually work. And that isn't something that anyone takes for granted. And in fact, I would suspect that a lot of the concerns that people have about some of the culture war stuff, they're willing to look the other way because of the economic policies. And so even though they might have some concerns about the Don't Say Gay bill, for example, at least the schools are open. That's sort of where they come in and say that. And they rewarded DeSantis for that choice. I mean, he won very decisively here. He feels like he has a mandate to do what he wants to do in Florida. Now, having said all that, what the way that Trump is working to define DeSantis and to downplay him and to say, well, you don't just get to put your narrative forth. I get to say what Florida's about. And I get to say that it's really not that great. He's playing it the way that he probably should, right? To make it seem as though, well, you're just in charge. It doesn't mean Florida wasn't doing great, before you got there. So it's definitely a I can see why he would go in that direction.
Talk about Florida just culturally. I mean, I was just down there and, I was in Miami. So South Florida, obviously a lot of Hispanic, Cuban, Venezuelan immigrants who've settled there, fleeing kind of left-wing oppression. But the state is a big state and then different parts of it. But it seems like, I mean, I would see people zooming around like South Beach on like motorcycles and cars that were sort of half cars, half motorcycles. Nobody wearing a helmet. It seems like, Florida's different. I mean, look at how they went for Trump compared to like other states that are swing states. What is it about Florida that makes it unique?
I don't even think, and because people ask me all the time, is it a red state? I mean, the people here are not very conservative, and you would think the opposite given, some of the policies that we've seen from Governor DeSantis, but they don't really care how other people are living their lives. I mean, when I was in DC, I was constantly getting scolded over every little decision. Is my dog from a rescue, for example? I always got that question, your dog's so cute, but is it a rescue? And so it's very, people in Washington, you have a TV in your room. There's always like a lot of like scolding, what's going on. And that doesn't happen here. People are kind of just allowed to do whatever they want to do, which I realize clashes with a lot of what we're seeing out of the policies and stuff. But I'm telling you culturally what it's like. And so I realized when I was living here, and it's been a year and a half, and before this, I lived in Washington for 10 years. I lived in the Northeast for much of my upbringing, and I grew up abroad. So I'm always kind of hyper alert, I would say, to cultural differences. And everyone attributes these lack of COVID policy, restrictions to conservatism. And actually, Florida is more about just the way that they live in their culture. It's much more live on the edge. It's much more risk taking. I mean, look, we live in an environment where a hurricane could wipe us out this hurricane season. Our home could be gone. That is something that people live with on a regular basis. And it's a trade-off that they are willing to make every single year after year. And they're just more okay with risk taking than people in certain parts of the Northeast. Like you said, you will drive down the highway. People drive extremely recklessly. They drive without helmets and so forth. That would just not, it's just not happen. And everything is just it's so much more like, okay, all the rules keep us safe up in the Northeast. Here, it's more, it's fine. So I always kind of look around and thought, I mean, the forced masking, forced vaccinations, that was never going to work here. They're okay with taking risks. They accept that. And so the way that DeSantis was able to thrive was to really, I would say, tap into that Florida culture and spirit where no, they don't, they're okay with, taking that risk and putting their lives at risk. I mean, they do it all the time. COVID wasn't seen as being different from the risks that they take anyway. And so, when it comes to public health guidance, like to me, as someone who covered healthcare policy for a decade, you work within cultural norms to achieve the best outcome. And so there was backlash because Florida wouldn't do things that way. But obviously there probably were some things they could have done better in terms of, because there was high death rates here, high hospitalizations and so forth. But, again, that's something that Floridians accept.
Too bad "Live Free or Die" was already taken because that could be the motto. It sounds like.
I'm surprised that was the motto there because I was there a few months ago and in New Hampshire, right? Yeah, and it's just I don't know. It's very, very. You don't even realize until you go to other states, how much more, everything is about following the rules and being on time and, just very, very strict. It's just very different in Florida. And so, yeah, it is what it is, right? So it's just one of the kind of observations that I've had, and I don't want to make it sound as though everyone's the same in this way. I certainly will sometimes be out at the grocery store or go to certain neighborhoods where people are masked still a lot more, or people in certain jobs, and everyone has circumstances in which they need to avoid COVID. Maybe they have an older adult at home. And so you'll see some of those differences, but the main difference is that nobody will scold that person and that person won't kind of scold back. It's not this whole back and forth that I witnessed, in the Northeast. So I'm not making any judgments on
Yeah.
the way anyone lives. I'm just, as someone who, was a third culture kid, I notice when there are sort of these, ways that people see the world differently.
Yeah, I'm just trying to like remember my takes on all this. I think I probably was nervous when DeSantis started opening things up. Like basically whenever the vaccines came in, that's when I was like, okay, this is done. Like, and then remember the shutdowns continued for schools were shut down, masking continued long after the vaccines. So that was sort of my point where I'm like, I was like a COVID hawk. Then I got vaccinated, and I'm like, okay, let's have fun. And yet everyone else was like, no, you can't, you can't have fun. Luckily, I lived in West Virginia, where similar ethos to Florida when it comes to that sort of thing. But I have to say, it was great going to Florida. I'm trying to think of what year it would have been, but I was like going to Palm Beach during. I was vaccinated, but it was you still had to wear the mask on the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
But then you would get to Florida, and it was like you went back in time. It was like you could live again. And it seems like DeSantis is still, reaping the benefits of that move that really paid off for him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say the one thing that could be a liability for him is just because so many people have moved to Florida, there is an affordability issue when it comes to housing. We're always saying, well, Florida is this contrast to New York and Silicon Valley and all of that. But now, because all of those folks are moving here with their higher salaries, they're driving up prices for rent and for housing. And, insurance prices are really high. And if you are someone who didn't come here from out of state with a higher salary, you're going to really struggle. And so that could be something probably, and I'm sort of surprised that Trump hasn't brought that up, but that could be something that could be potentially, a liability for him politically, because people are going to talk about what it's like to live like this. He did sign an affordable housing bill into law today. But that's going to take time. It basically allows for more places to be built. So, if the supply goes up, then hopefully the prices will go down. So that's kind of the idea. But that's sort of where, yes, he has the benefit of people saying, okay, I want to move here, but then you get here and it's not as affordable as you thought it was going to be.
So you might have seen my latest Daily Beast, not even my latest, but my recent Daily Beast column,
Yeah.
where I was kind of hard on Ron DeSantis. But this is just my impression. Admittedly, it's about like vibes and it's anecdotal, but it is my sense and watching DeSantis, as particularly like in interviews like he did with Pierce Morgan, that he seems, when he's in Florida and he's behind the podium, and honestly, I think losing weight might have been a mistake. I think he was bigger and beefier, might have been a tougher image to go up against, a more masculine image to go up against Trump. But in Florida, it seems like he can be tough and he controls the room and he decides when to have a press conference and when not to and who to call on. But now he's suddenly like in a studio taking someone, being interrogated by someone else. And he seemed weird. He seemed awkward. And it makes me wonder. I feel like I was really bullish on DeSantis about a month or two ago. And now I'm like, yeah, I think I'm betting on Trump. But is that just my perception, or what did you think of this kind of rollout the last couple of weeks?
Well, first of all, I don't want to downplay your perception, but
That's okay.
I do want to make a comment in that I was on the campaign trail in 2020. I was a healthcare reporter then, but I was covering a lot of the primary because they were rolling out their different healthcare plans, and like abortion rights was a big thing. And so I was, following the Democratic candidates around. And I have to tell you, all the reporters were just like, Joe Biden doesn't have a shot in hell. I mean, really, that was like the predetermined narrative. And it was because, you would go to an event and he would show up 3 hours late and barely anyone would be there. And he would struggle through his remarks. I think at one point too, he was at this Planned Parenthood event where like the mic went out and he was having trouble articulating his views on reproductive rights anyway. So I don't want to say you're wrong, but I do want to say that I think that sometimes, we who are in this all the time, and this is our full-time job, have observations that we think are going to be really important and play into voters' minds, and then they don't. So having said that, it's true. Ron DeSantis is not particularly charismatic. He is a little bit odd. And he's a nerd, and that's something that I think that can be spinned into more of a positive if you're going up against Trump, where you would say, well, look, he's a lot of drama, everything is just here and there. And like, it's not, DeSantis is very scripted. Everything is planned, calculated, and deliberate. There is no, oh, I accidentally said this. That doesn't happen. I mean, it hasn't happened in years for him. And so yes, your observations are taken. I get it. But I think a lot of it is here's the thing too, is that like he's doing well in some of these early voting states. So even if Trump is doing really well in the national polls, DeSantis is doing well in the states where that's how you win a primary, is you win the different, early voting states and so forth. So he has a luxury right now in that he's not officially running. So he can keep practicing how he's doing. And look, I've watched him for the past 2 years, every single press conference that he's done. I've noticed the mannerisms. I've noticed how people interact with him and how he interacts with voters and so forth. And I have to say he's improved a lot. And you say, oh, he's good at the stump, he's good at being in control. He wasn't always good at that either. So he has improved in that sense. And then being able to sit down, that could be something where he gets better at as well. And I think it'll come down to, how much does it matter to people? I think in general, people like personality, but they also like to win elections. And so I think the big argument DeSantis is going to make is, I've never lost an election. This guy lost against Joe Biden. Why would you support someone who lost against Joe Biden? And I think the Trump team would probably say, well, this isn't the same election as 4 years ago, which is true. We're not in the middle of COVID. We're potentially on the brink of a recession, job losses, et cetera. Or, even framing it that way in a general election might be helpful for them. And so, yeah, that's my big takeaway. I don't know if that fully answers your question. But everything that you said, I have wondered about. I've wondered whether he would struggle in some of these areas. But, he's someone that clearly he's 44, and he's someone that clearly has started somewhere. And I've seen the trajectory change for him. I've seen him go from kind of uncomfortable to like, now he's like running a show. Like, you get the Ron DeSantis show at these events and everything. He's very confident. He's starting to interact with voters more. He's doing more selfies and things like that. And he's opening up more about his personal life, which he was never doing before.
That will be interesting to watch. It sounds like he has the potential for growth. I think he's going to need to, but maybe he can do it. Any, I guess, final thoughts, anything that we need to know about Florida, about DeSantis, about Trump, or about you? Maybe plug it, anything you want to plug.
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm here in Miami, so I'm always open, obviously, to sources who want to chat about what's going on. But I think it's really going to be important over the next few weeks to watch the legislature in Florida to see what kinds of bills the governor signs into law. And I'm anxious to see what he decides to do in terms of launching a presidential run, whether it's going to be here in Florida or whether it's going to be, I don't know, in a state that Trump lost, maybe, to make a point. and continuing to, I mean, I'm always tuning into, he has an event coming up just as soon as you and I get off this podcast. He has another event that's coming up. And so I'm interested to see, I'm always kind of looking for new nuggets that kind of piece the puzzle together of who is Ron DeSantis. Because I think it just it helps to inform, where, how he became who he is, and can he, go the distance, which I still don't know. I'm not going to call it one way or another. I hope that listeners understand that I'm presenting the different positions that are out there, and I'm not trying to say, I'm not going to make any predictions on who wins this primary.
Well, you've been doing amazing reporting. I would say, I mean, you've got Trump and DeSantis both within a couple hours drive of you a lot of the time, right in your state. Nobody's doing a better job of covering this. And I think everyone should be. How could they follow you on Twitter if they want to keep up with what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah. Well, don't tweet rude things to me because I will mute you.
I do the same.
Oh yeah, no, I don't fight with anyone on Twitter. I can't. My heart can't take it. So I'm at Leonard KL, Leonard KL, and I write pretty regularly. I also work weekends and nights and all that, depending on what's going on. So I love news tips. I love to hear people's perspectives. And I'm at kleonard@insider.com if people want to email me.
Very cool. Nobody better to follow this year than Kimberly Leonard. Kimberly Leonard, thank you for coming on the news.
Thank you.